Dave loved the open road. For 15 years he had been driving his rig, hauling cargo across the country. He had seen it all: sunrises over the mountains, storms across the plains, the quiet beauty of the desert night. He liked the solitude, the hum of the engine, the freedom of the open highway. Dave wasn't afraid of much. He'd faced blizzards in the Rockies and tornadoes in the Midwest. He'd driven through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The darkness seemed to press in on his truck as he drove deeper into the Arizona desert. He was on Route 666, a stretch of highway with a sinister name and a reputation to match. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, followed by something unseen. Route 666 cut through the heart of the Arizona desert like a scar. It was a desolate stretch of highway, miles of blacktop under a vast empty sky. It was the kind of place where the heat shimmered on the horizon, playing tricks on the eye. The road was known for its desolate beauty, its rugged landscape, and its isolation, but it was also known for something else. Locals called it the Devil's Highway, and for good reason. They spoke of strange lights in the sky, phantom hitchhikers, and unexplained accidents. David heard the stories, of course. Every trucker had. But tonight, the stories felt different, more real, more menacing. The wind howled through the canyons, a mournful sound that sent shivers down Dave's spine. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it clung to him like the desert dust. Dave relied on his CB radio to break the monotony of the long drives. It was his connection to the outside world, a lifeline to other truckers on the road. But tonight, the airwaves were eerily silent. Only static filled his cab, a constant hiss that did little to ease the growing tension. He reached out to adjust the dial, hoping to find a clear channel, when a voice cut through the static. It was faint, almost inaudible, a whisper lost in the electronic noise. "Help me," the voice pleaded, its tone desperate. Dave froze, his hand hovering over the dial. He strained to hear, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone or something was out there, lost and calling for help. The voice, though faint, had sounded desperate, filled with a raw terror that sent chills down Dave's spine. He couldn't ignore it. He scanned the desolate landscape, his eyes searching the roadside. The headlights of his truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the barren landscape. The wind howled around him, whipping his truck with gusts of sand and dust. He could see nothing but endless miles of desert. He reached for the CB microphone. "Hello!" he called out, his voice tense. "Did someone just call for help?" Silence. The static returned, filling the cab with its unsettling hiss. "I heard you. Tell me where you are." Again, only static answered him. He felt a chill, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He continued down the highway, his eyes scanning the roadside, his heart pounding in his chest. Dave's headlights flickered across a lone figure standing by the roadside, shrouded in shadow. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound being the hum of his truck's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The figure seemed almost ethereal, like a ghostly apparition materializing out of the darkness. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat that billowed in the wind. The coat flapped like the wings of a giant bird, adding to the surreal atmosphere of the scene. Dave squinted, trying to make out more details, but the darkness swallowed most of the man's features. He was waving his arms, frantically trying to flag down Dave's truck. Relief washed over Dave. He had been driving for hours, and the sight of another human being was a welcome change. The man's desperate gestures made it clear he needed help. Finally, someone he could help. Dave felt a sense of purpose as he slowed down, his truck's headlights casting long shadows on the deserted road. He pulled his truck over to the side of the road, the air brakes sighing as he came to a stop. The sound echoed in the still night, almost like a sigh of relief from the truck itself. The man approached the truck cautiously, his face hidden in the shadows of his hat. Dave could see the outline of his figure, but the details remained obscured. Dave rolled down his window, a wave of cold air rushing into the warm cab. The sudden chill made him shiver, but he ignored it, focusing on the man outside. "Are you all right?" Dave asked, his voice gruff with concern. He leaned out slightly, trying to get a better look at the stranger. "I heard you on the CB, what's wrong?" Dave's mind raced with possibilities, each more dire than the last. The man stepped closer, his face illuminated by the truck's interior light. The light revealed a face that looked like it had seen better days. His features were gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow, his skin pale and clammy. He looked exhausted, terrified. It was as if he had been through a harrowing ordeal. "Thank God," the man rasped, his voice dry and cracked. It sounded like he hadn't had a drink of water in days. "I've been stranded out here for hours." The desperation in his voice was palpable, making Dave's heart ache. "Can you give me a lift to the next town?" The man's plea was simple, but it carried the weight of someone who had been through a lot. Dave nodded, ready to help. "Sure, hop in," Dave said, nodding towards the passenger seat. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. The man offered a weak smile, his eyes flickering towards the dark desert behind him. It was as if he was leaving something behind, something he didn't want to talk about. He moved quickly, sliding into the passenger seat and pulling the door shut. The sound of the door closing echoed in the stillness of the night. He was trembling, his breath shallow and ragged. It was clear he had been through something harrowing. He clutched his arms tightly as if trying to ward off the cold. But it wasn't just the cold, it was something deeper. Something that chilled him to the bone. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're a lifesaver." His gratitude seemed genuine, but there was an underlying tone of desperation. Dave put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. He glanced at his passenger, taking in his appearance. The man looked out of place, like he belonged to another time. The man's clothes were old-fashioned, almost out of place in the modern world. It was as if he had stepped out of a different era. His coat looked like something out of an old Western movie, long and dusty. It flapped slightly as he settled into his seat. "What brings you out this way?" Dave asked, trying to make conversation. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating. The man hesitated, his eyes darting towards the window. It was as if he was searching for something or someone in the darkness. "Just passing through," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. There was a sadness in his tone, a sense of loss that was palpable. Dave tried again. "Heading home?" he asked. He hoped to draw the man out to learn more about this mysterious passenger. The man shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. It was as if he was looking at a memory, something long gone. "No," he whispered, his voice filled with a strange sadness. "I don't have a home to go to." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The man fell silent, staring out the window at the passing darkness. The night seemed to swallow his words, leaving only the sound of the truck's engine. Dave felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unsettling about the man, something that made him uneasy. He glanced at his passenger again, a sense of unease growing within him. The man's presence was almost ghostly. He could have sworn the man's skin seemed paler, his eyes even more hollow than before. It was as if he was fading away. He turned his attention back to the road, but the feeling of unease remained. The night stretched on, and the mystery of his passenger deepened. Dave slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, but the passenger seat was empty. There was no sign of the man, no open door, no footprints in the dust. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Dave was shaken. He checked the road, the surrounding desert, but there was nothing. The man was gone. He was alone. He tried to rationalize what he had seen. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing, but deep down, he knew what he had seen. He had picked up a hitchhiker, a ghost hitchhiker. The stories, the legends he had always dismissed, came flooding back to him. The CB radio crackled to life, breaking the silence of the night. the static abruptly replaced by a voice that seemed to come from another world. It was the same voice he had heard before, the voice of the hitchhiker he had picked up on a lonely stretch of road. "Thank you," the voice whispered, its tone filled with a haunting sadness that sent shivers down his spine. "But you can't help me. No one can." Dave's blood ran cold as the words echoed in his mind. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white with the pressure. He was alone in the cab, yet the voice seemed to be coming from the passenger seat right next to him, as if someone was sitting there. He could feel a cold presence beside him, a weight pressing down on the seat, making the air around him feel heavy and oppressive. He glanced at the passenger seat again, his heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. This time, he saw it. A faint ghostly figure was materializing in the passenger seat. A faint translucent figure was sitting in the passenger seat, its form barely visible but unmistakably there. It was the hitchhiker, his gaunt face illuminated by the eerie green glow of the dashboard, casting long shadows across his features. His eyes were fixed on Dave, filled with a mixture of sadness and despair, as if pleading for help that could never come. Dave was paralyzed with fear, his breath caught in his throat, unable to move or speak, trapped in the chilling encounter. The touch sent a jolt of fear through Dave's body, but it was also strangely calming. The hitchhiker's touch, though cold, felt almost human. The fear that had gripped him began to subside, replaced by a strange sense of compassion for the lost soul sitting beside him. He realized that the hitchhiker meant him no harm. He was just lost, trapped, seeking solace on this lonely stretch of highway. Dave took a deep breath, calming his nerves. He looked at the phantom hitchhiker, no longer afraid. "What do you want?" Dave asked, his voice barely a whisper. The hitchhiker turned his sorrowful eyes to Dave. "To go home," the phantom whispered, his voice filled with longing, "to find peace." Dave nodded, understanding washing over him. He would help the hitchhiker find peace, even if it meant facing his own fears. He continued driving down Route 666, the phantom hitchhiker by his side, his fear replaced by a strange sense of purpose.